Welcome to On the Go with AAUW. I'm Deborah Wright, your host, and my guests today are Brenda Carr and Karen Stupski. Brenda is the trustee or a trustee at School of Living, and Karen is executive director. Welcome, Brenda. Welcome, Karen. Glad you could join me today. Today, our program will give an informative overview and perhaps a new perspective on how we use land, the ownership of land, and the unique communities of people who share common principles and philosophies related to these topics. So, Brenda, maybe we should start off with just sharing with our audience, what is School of Living?
A School of Living is a community land trust that has its roots in the Great Depression. It evolved from the life of Ralph Borsodi, and is currently a collection of communities that live on our land and lease the land of the School of Living.
And maybe we should talk a little bit about the founders, Ralph Borsodi, if we want to talk about him for a minute, and Karen can always just join in. And there's so much information we're going to share today that we could make a whole show just out of some of the philosophy and some of the founders of this whole.
Indeed, you could certainly make a whole program out of Ralph Borsodi and the ideas that he generated. He wrote about 15 books and who knows how many articles, and he had his beginnings in the late 19th century. He was actually born in 1886, so he was about 10 years older than my grandmother, who was born in 1775. And he grew up in Lower Manhattan. And his father was a publisher in Manhattan, and he got most of his schooling from hanging out with his father and all the intellectuals that came and went and got books published by William Borsodi. And that's pretty much how he got his education. But he was highly influenced by Henry George, who had written a book called Progress in Poverty, which was really a response to Adam Smith's treatise on capitalism. And it basically countered Adam Smith's idea of capitalism as a competitive kind of thing, and it tended to see capitalism as more of a cooperative enterprise.
Right, and they were more, well, some of his ideas, he was concerned about land and maybe the value of land, or how land was to be allocated.
Well, it really came about in his life in New York City, and it was a very unhealthy place. Food was not as nutritious as it could be, and his family was sick all the time, and so he decided to purchase some property outside the city and do some homesteading, and he ran into a gentleman that advised him about the toxins that are in food and how to eat healthy and a balanced diet. So he and his wife, who was a Kansas farm girl, went off to their 7-acre farm and experimented in a family homestead. And it was from his experiences there that he wrote a lot of his later books, and eventually it was the experience of the homesteading family that led to the School of Living.
And maybe, Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about the land, or some other ideas about maybe land not just belonging to one individual or perhaps persons that have wealth, but that this philosophy or the ideas of these men were different?
Right. Well, so Ralph Borsodi was very influenced by Henry George, and one of his key points was that he believed that land should not be privately owned, and he thought that the private ownership of land is one of the main reasons why we have so many disparities of wealth here in this country. He thought it was the cause of poverty was the private ownership of land, and the fact that when land increases in value, it increases in value because of the action of the whole community, because of development, because of the growth of industry, cities, and that type of thing. But when people privately own the land and private individuals pocket that profit, it's very unjust. So he basically advocated a system called the single tax theory, whereby land would be taxed, and that would be the only tax that would happen. And he argued that if we did that, we could eliminate poverty and we could have an economically just society. Well, that was never implemented on a national scale, but Ralph Borsodi tried to implement it on a small scale, and he came up with the idea of the community land trust, where the community land trust would own the land, and then the people living on the land would lease it from the community land trust and pay a land rent for using it. And then that land rent could be used to acquire more land.
Right, and the whole premise is that someone's not owning land to make a profit or to accumulate wealth. Also, too, we have some slides of Borsodi and what I call the wheel. Maybe we want to take a look at that. We could talk about just his thoughts about society, I guess how people live, and maybe some of the problems of everyone living together, some of the challenges we face in a society. We have a slide of Borsodi and one of his students, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was a lifetime project for Ralph Borsodi. Whenever he would talk with a community group or an individual, and they would talk about some problem either in the community or in the social structure or the economic situations, that he would write down these problems in a card. And by the latter part of his life, he had thousands of these cards, and he organized them in categories. And his life work was the development of the 17 problems of living, 4 of which were intellectual problems or philosophical, metaphysical problems. And then there were 4 problems that related to our values, how we develop our values. The rest were all just 9 practical problems of dealing with living situations. And from those, they're really the foundation of what the school attempts to teach or to make the basis of inquiry. That's what the school is about, exploring the problems of living, whether it's in community or whether it's the relationship of a community to a larger community. It's the problems of living that we
that he was concerned
confront.
with.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And did we have some information that you brought or something you might want to show? You had a few books by Borsodi or a couple of things.
We've got one called Flight from the City.
Yes, this is the story of his trip or his going out of New York City and doing the homestead, and a whole process of learning to grow his own food, his wheat, and sharing things. And this was a book that was published to show that you could do it and show you how to do it. And that was Flight from the City. It's interesting that it was published at roughly the same time that he wrote a scathing critique of the factory system called This Ugly Civilization.
And you know, I was just thinking that when we look at, even when he was born and the time that we're talking about, Henry George and Ralph Borsodi, it's really the Civil War had ended, and maybe we're moving from an agricultural society. People are moving into the cities, and the developments and the new things that are being created are making people live closer together. And some of the challenges, our society is changing, the way people live is changing. So maybe that was also some of the basis of his flight from the city, is that he's seeing that maybe a rural setting provides some of the things that are missing when people are living in very close quarters, or just some of the challenges of the times that were changing.
Yeah, he was definitely a proponent of agrarianism that going back to the land was the way to solve the problems. He was writing during the Great Depression. His first books were published in 1929, and This Ugly Civilization was published in 1933. And so he was dealing with these problems. He had gotten involved with a group in Dayton that was trying to form a homesteaded situation. And that group got itself involved with federal funding and lost control. And he backed out of that. But it was there that he met Mildred Loomis, who became his partner in creating the School of Living.
Okay, we have so much information. I want to try to share with our audience. I want to move on to a section that Karen can give us some information about, because she actually lives in one of the communities. So do you want to tell us a little bit about where you are and what it's all about?
Sure. So, so the School of Living is still alive today, and one of the things that it does is with the Community Land Trust is it makes land accessible. And so School of Living owns 6 different parcels of land in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And on each parcel of land, there's an intentional community or a homestead that strives to live the homesteading life, you know, that Borsodi wrote about and advocated. And so I live at one of those communities, which is called Heathcote in Maryland.
I thought that might be a good place to start. We do have a video that we can share with the audience, and I think it's fascinating. I think they'd be very interested in watching it.
Okay.
And so we can find out more about it. How long have you been there?
I have been living there for 22 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you've seen a lot of change. The video will probably show some of that, and I believe we have some other slides also. So
right. Yeah. So School of Living first acquired Heathcote's land in 1965.
Okay. Well, we do have a video we want to share.
Okay.
What does it mean to live in a community? What does it mean to live sustainably? At the Heathcote community in Freeland, Maryland, residents are attempting to answer these questions.
Heathcote is a small, intentional community and permaculture farm and demonstration site. We're part of the School of Living Community Land Trust. We've been here since 1965. We currently have 8 adult members and 2 youth.
I think it was about 67. And I started coming up, and the woman who was the founder, Mildred Loomis, was here at the time. And she would gather a bunch of young people up here in one of these buildings. I think it might have been one of the Anarcher cabins. I don't even remember. I know it had a fireplace. And she would meet with us on Friday nights and talk about Ralph Borsodi, who was her mentor, and the reason this place was here and why she did what she did and all that sort of stuff.
Heathcote's education programs consist of internships, so folks can come and live here for anywhere from a month to 6 months and partake in community life and be involved in our farm and renovation projects. We also offer visitor days. These are days that we're open to the community and folks can come and do a tour and participate in some hands-on projects and have a meal with us. We also offer workshops from time to time. We've been offering the permaculture design course. We've done that 14 times, and we also have different shorter workshops.
Students that come to my class have educated themselves already in what the issues and the problems are, and they're looking for solution. And what permaculture design has to offer is a real solution, because it's a mindset as well as a methodology. In my course, what I try to achieve is a starting point, so that when people finish the course, they know where to start. Wherever they are, they know where to start.
I feel that it is indeed the future, if not a transition, of human life. here at Heathcote, they're working towards sustainable living and are steps above other communities that I've been in terms of conflict resolution and living together as community.
I think part of the motivation for me to be in community was what I have called to be with a constructive family. That is what the way it's worked out. I can be here with a group of people that works to support one another. I have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I've definitely come up against limitations. But I find that the more I participate, the better I feel.
I think it's great, generally. There's a lot. I mean, I love that my kids have a lot of freedom. This is a great place for them to kind of run around outside in nature, go swimming, and when there've been other kids around, that's I think it's been a real big plus that they've had.
One big reason that Heathcote has survived is because we're part of School of Living, and School of Living provides a lot of support. School of Living protects the land because School of Living owns the land. So at Heathcote, people have come and gone over the years, and sometimes there's been a complete, transition in the membership. Over the years, during those hard times, sometimes School of Living offers support. They might, be flexible about lease fee payments and things like that until Heathcote could get back on its feet.
I am a carpenter and a cabinet maker, and so I tend to do the woodworking that needs done here. Repair work, plumbing, tile work, masonry, whatever, drywall, whatever needs to be done.
Being part of this community, I feel very safe here emotionally. I feel safe physically. It's very supportive. It's a good balance here. Yeah, and I just have so many things I can do, and contribute to the community. So that really means a lot to me.
Heathcote was the first community, and there are 5 others. Karen, could you tell us about them?
Sure. Yeah, 2 of the communities are located near State College, Pennsylvania. One of them is called Julian Woods, and it has over 100 acres, and there are 12 households that live there. But one of the most unique things about the community is that it has a constructed wetland wastewater treatment system. So that there's a large greenhouse, and all the water from the toilets and the showers of the whole community goes through some constructed wetlands in there and is treated naturally.
And one thing I noticed about them too was they have very attractive architecture of the homes there, large glass pane windows, and quite a bit different from the structures at Heathcote.
Yes, and one of the most beautiful buildings at Julian Woods is the Zendo, which is a special building where they have a large meditation hall, and a group of Buddhists meditates there regularly.
And were you there just
yes,
a while ago?
we just spent our annual meeting there at Julian Woods and had a wonderful tour of the Zendo and beautiful architecture there. I believe most of the homes there were actually built from wood that are the trees that were harvested from the land.
Right.
Yeah, and so then right next door to Julian Woods, there's another community called Ahimsa Village, and they basically just have one family living there, but they are a vegan homestead and permaculture farm.
And could you tell us a little bit about permaculture, in case that's a term our audience might not be too familiar with?
Sure. Permaculture is a method of designing sustainable systems that are modeled on natural ecosystems. And so permaculture systems provide for food, water, waste treatment, energy, and shelter, all in ecologically sustainable ways.
Okay, so we have 2. We have Ahimsa and Ahimsa Village, and there's Common Ground.
The Common Ground is in Virginia, near Lexington, and it was started by Mel Leisure, and his family, and at one point they had started another community, and it had fallen apart because suddenly, you know, the suburbs came out there and the land got expensive and everybody wanted to extract the wealth that had accumulated, the speculative wealth. And so when he formed the community in Common Ground, he came into the School of Living as a way to ensure that the land would always be available for the community, and that the common grounds would be shared. That particular community experimented with straw bale housing, cordwood housing, and of course the post and beam housing, and a variety of composting toilets.
And there are two more?
One of them is in Cochranville, Pennsylvania.
All right.
And it's just maybe an hour or two from Philadelphia, and it too is a single-family homestead, as opposed to being in a community. But they are focusing on implementing permaculture as well, and they raise bees and chickens, and they are developing a mead-making business. And mead is sort of like a honey wine.
And then lastly, I believe there's one in like Central Virginia.
Yes, Azoti came into the School of Living as a sanctuary for Cherokee Indians, to a tribe to practice their beliefs and customs, and it was primarily a family of a Cherokee tribe, and that family has since returned that land to us. So we are seeking a new community for that land. So all you have to do is Google School of Living to find our website that we produce.
Internet's always a good way. I mean, I found a lot of information just by going to School of Living.
Yes.
A lot of information, and I didn't really get a chance to go through all of it because there's just so much. And there's so much to absorb, but the public is able, or local communities are able to come to the quarterly meetings, and some of the communities also have outreach, like educational programs and tours.
Oh, that is one of the missions. Part of their lease with the School of Living is an obligation to do public education around the issues of sustainable living and ecological use of the land. Early on, Borsodi had a concern for ecological use of the land, and it was just a natural that the School of Living kind of made it up with the Back to the Land movement. In fact, some people refer to Borsodi as the father of the Back to Land. He and Mildred Loomis, who did conferences and workshops during the period of time in which she directed the School of Living, mainly in the eastern regions, but she was from the Ohio area, and for a while the School of Living was in Ohio at her homestead there.
I just wanted to ask you too, because you're not actually a resident in one of the communities, how that affects your relationship with them, or does it just give you another perspective on?
Well, I may be one of those frustrated hippies who didn't get a chance to go off and do the Back to the Land thing, or for one reason or other just found a different path. And then I discovered the School of Living in 2006, and found that I had an opportunity to have an interest, you know, to develop my interest with it, and participate in ongoing communities and experience those communities. The way the Board of Trustees is organized is that at least 3 of the 9 members must be residents on the land. At least 3 of the 9 members must not be members on the land, but members of the community. And ideally, the other 3 might be a selection of people from other communities or just from the surrounding region.
And also, too, I wanted to ask, because if people want to know how to contact you or to get involved, and also, too, because you want maybe to pull in younger generation of persons who may be interested, how they may be able to contact you, because we need to
We're
let them know
especially
now.
interested in young people and having them get involved. And they can contact us through schoolofliving.org or schoolofliving@gmail.com, I believe is our email address.
Okay, well, Brenda and Karen, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been so much information, we just couldn't get it into one program. And I want to thank our audience for joining us. Please tune in again for another segment of On the Go with AAUW. Please tune in next time.